Bernardine, welcome to Waterstones. I should say welcome back to Waterstones, and congratulations on winning the Booker Prize. I'm thinking actually a part of your book, Girl, Woman, Other, one of the characters, Carol, is unhappy at university, and her mother lists some women, black women, who were the first to do certain things. Diane Abbott as the first black MP, Valerie Amos as the first Baroness. And when you stood up on that stage at the Guildhall, you said that you were the first black woman to win the Booker Prize, and in fact the first black British author to win.
Yes.
So you have joined this sort of panoply of women who are now sort of there as a sort of a marker for others. Do you feel like that? And what does that feel like?
I don't know what I feel at the moment, because I'm just still in a state of being overwhelmed by everything. And then every so often I think, oh my God, you did it. You won the Booker Prize, you know, and then I have to get on with kind of more publicity stuff. But I did say that, and I'm really glad I said that, because people don't know. You know, most people didn't know that we'd never won it. Mm-hmm. So they need to know that somebody has. I remember when Toni Morrison died, people would say she was the first black woman to win the Nobel Prize. No, she was the only black woman to win the Nobel Prize, and that was nearly 30 years ago.
Right.
You know, so until we get the kind of statistics and the numbers, you never quite know what the reality is for, say, you know, certain kind of marginalised communities.
Yeah. In fact, not just the fact that you have won it, but to win it with this book. So Girl, Woman, Other has this wide range of characters. It's a very inclusive novel in that way. And I wondered if we could talk a bit about that. So why you chose to tell the story through these named chapters. And there's also something about the style of it, so that you often have these sentences which don't have capitalised beginnings. There is something about the flow of one story into the next. Could you tell us a bit about that?
So the book kind of grew organically. The desire was to write as many of these women as possible. And in the end, I came up with 12 of them. But I didn't know at the start how many characters there were going to be. And I think in the editing process, I always forget my process, but I think in the editing process, I had the 12 women together, and then I grouped them into groups of threes at some point, because that seemed to make sense. And characters emerged out of other character stories. So Amma is the theatre director who ends up having a show at the National Theatre after nearly 40 years. So she has this big breakthrough moment. And Yaz is her daughter, so Yaz had her own sections. Dominique is somebody she set a theatre company up with in the 80s, so she had a section. Carol is a banker, working class Nigerian, ends up going to Oxford, joins the corporate world. Her mother was in her section, Bumi, who's a Nigerian immigrant, so then Bumi had her own section. So it kind of grew like that. And the women's stories, so they all have their own sections, but they're not individual stories as such, they're not short stories. It's a cohesive novel, but it's unusually structured, obviously. So they all have their own sections, but they also kind of bleed into each other's sections. So there are X degrees of separation between all the characters. And then I created this form, which, in fact, I call the novel a fusion fiction, because the way the stories fuse into each other, but also in terms of the form of the novel, whereby I don't use many full stops. I have lots of commas, but it's a kind of poetic patterning on the page, but it's not poetry. So it's a very free-flowing reading experience. I kind of go like that because I think that's how I've written it.
That's exactly how it is. That's,
it kind of goes,
yeah, it does that across the page.
And you're kind of going with it, and you kind of, hopefully the reader kind of goes with the flow. And I really enjoyed writing that form, actually, because it gave me so much freedom. And it felt like it was very energised and also a little bit poetic. And then I had to revise it and sharpen it up and tighten it and make it work structurally. So that's how it evolved. And that experience of using this form, this flowing form, allowed me, I feel, to go back into the characters' past. So we go back into everybody's childhood, and then we see them in the present, because the novel is set in the present day. But I'm also inside their minds and outside of their minds. But also, I feel that the form kind of means we're kind of accessing their subconscious as you're reading it. And you're slipping from Amma's subconscious, in a sense, to Yaz's, and then into Dominique's, and then the next chapter you've got like Carol and her mother, and so on and so forth. Is it a stream of consciousness? Possibly a little bit, but not really, because I think it's quite concrete in many ways as well.
that gesture you were doing of that sort of the flow, fluidity seemed to me to be a really major theme in the book as well, because there is some gender fluidity, there is some fluidity of sexuality, and there is the fluidity of these people in each other's lives.
Yes, and class.
Yeah, and class fluidity as well, people moving from sort of class to class. Is that a correct assessment? Is that sort of something you were thinking of as you were writing that book, that sort of idea?
I wasn't consciously thinking of it. But you know, when I'm writing, I'm just inside the stories, writing the stories, trying to produce as much variety as possible. You know, so I'm like, well, they can't all be straight women because there's 12 of them, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to have some lesbians, some are going to be bisexual, one's going to be polyamorous, one's going to be pansexual, and then several of them are heterosexual, and you know, even homophobic, right? And then with the class, it was really, I'm very interested in class. I'm very interested in how people become the people they become and how they move out of their early lives. So quite a few of the characters start off in very ordinary working class backgrounds and then move beyond that to lead middle class lives. Because another interesting thing I think about the novel is that I'm interested in black women, how we achieve and succeed in this society. And one of the ways in which we do that is to leave our origins behind, our classes behind, and you know, assume middle class or even wealthy lives. And then, so the sexuality is gender. So obviously sort of transgender issues are quite topical. Mm-hmm. I know some non-binary people, so I thought, okay, let me create also a non-binary person, which is why I often describe the book as about 12 primarily black British women with an X, WOMXN, because that is trans inclusive. Mm-hmm. Whereas, you know, the non-binary figure isn't a woman anymore. They are non-binary.
Yeah. So people often talk about a novel being a novel of our times, and it's a bit of an empty phrase often. You think, well, what does that actually mean? But you have managed to cover huge amounts of time without it feeling like a sort of bloated historical novel.
Yeah, it covers over 100 years because the oldest character isn't, well, the character who is deepest in history is somebody born in 1875. And, you know, so it covers the whole of the 20th century. And some people are calling it a feminist novel. I don't mind, they can call it a feminist novel. That's not what I was thinking when I was writing it, because it feels like it's a bit didactic to be saying that, but actually it does explore, to a greater or lesser extent, feminism in the novel, as it is relevant to some of the characters. It's not relevant to all the characters. So Hattie, who is the 93-year-old farmer in Northumberland, you know, who is a powerful, formidable matriarch, you know, this is a black woman who's a farmer and has lived on this farm for 93 years. And London is a completely alien sort of concept to her. She wouldn't call herself a feminist, but feminists would call her a feminist. And then there is one woman who considers herself a feminist, but she's very much not really inclusive. We think she's white, but she's not really inclusive of black women in her feminism. And actually, once she has a few disastrous relationships, once she gets with a guy who is pretty old school in his attitude towards women, she kind of ditches her feminism. And she says, well, look where it's got me. And then you've got Amma, who is definitely feminist and lesbian and has been all her life, and Dominique, and they're grappling with the new young feminists, the millennials, who perhaps see them as old school, you know. And then you've got Yaz, who says, I'm not a feminist, I'm a humanitarian. You know, what does that mean? You know, she's like saying, being a woman is so passé, mum. You know, she's 19, she's at university, she's very woke. So actually, it does throw up all kinds of things about feminism, but also all kinds of things about blackness, because they range from women who are very dark to women who don't look like they're of colour, and people who are engaging with race to people who aren't interested in engaging with race. And I think I was just sort of trying to explore all the conversations that I hear and am party to. You know, I'm very much identified as a black woman. I have members of my family we're all mixed race, right? So English and white English and Nigerian, but members of my family who would identify as mixed race or just uninterested in it. You know, so I chose to identify as a black woman many years ago, and I think that's how society sees me. But I totally respect somebody who says, well, I'm mixed race, why should I identify with one side? They won't identify as white because they can't. Yeah. Because society will say, well, you're not. But actually, you can just say, well, that's all. I'm biracial. Yeah. I'm multiple heritage. I'm mixed race. That's absolutely valid and fine. And that's what I am within being black. So So like a lifetime of having these conversations has been put into this novel. I could not have written this novel at the age of 22 because young women write young women. And if they write old women, they're nuts, right? I have to say, seriously. So at my age, I could write young women, and I know young women, I teach young women, and then I can also conceive of people in their 70s, 80s and 90s as fully formed and functioning human beings.
Who are not just nuts.
Who are not nuts.
That idea of race is really interesting, and in that spirit of inclusivity, there's a character who discovers something about their genetic heritage, this idea of DNA testing. And of course, anybody who's ever done that test will find that they're not nearly as one thing as they thought they were. There is this whole range of things. And I wondered whether, whilst this is a book primarily about black womanhood, that it really does something about breaking down those divisions that people seem to be wanting to erect more and more in this age of extremes where people are one thing or another, that actually what you show is that people are fluid and made up of many things, and that our society is actually far more, not homogenized, but far more mixed than we give it credit for.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a good interpretation, thanks.
You can have that.
Yeah, I am political, but I think everything is complicated and messy and nuanced.
Yeah.
And I really do try to steer away from very simplistic, didactic political viewpoints, whether it's on race or gender or sexuality or class or anything, because it is a mix of it. Always there is a mix of things at play. And I guess that's what I am doing with the novel. I'm showing the complexity and the variety of experiences and identities and options and so on as it pertains to black women. But I'm really surprised with this novel that women of colour are getting it generally, white women are getting it, and even middle-aged white men coming up to me and saying how much they love it, and I'm like, oh, do you know what I mean? It's interesting for me.
Yeah.
That and I guess this is perhaps while the Booker thing's been going on.
Yeah.
But that's the joy of the prize, that the books are kind of reaching into all kinds of parts of the UK and the world that the book might not have reached, and then people read it and they realise, well, actually it's about human experience, it's about humanity. These people are not alien to me. They have relationships. The novel is also about relationships and families. They have problems. They have ambitions. They have desires. They have disappointments. They have tragedies. They have all those things. And I think, although those things are refracted through my characters, they are universal experiences.
When you were last here, we were filming a little Shelfie video in which you were picking books that had inspired you. And one of those was Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde.
Yes.
And she once said, "I'm deliberate and afraid of nothing." And I wondered whether that was a sentiment with which you could sympathise and attach yourself to.
I am deliberate.
I am deliberate and afraid of nothing. I wonder whether winning the Booker Prize, if you didn't feel this already, instills you with a confidence to do whatever you want next.
I am afraid of nothing. That's a really powerful statement, isn't it?
Yeah.
I feel vindicated, for sure. I feel that after, I went to drama school in 79, that's when I started writing, and 40 years later, I've got this achievement. I mean, in a sense, it is a rubber stamping. It's not that I have undervalued my own work since then, or that other people have undervalued it, but we know that it is a sort of landmark thing to win this prize in the sort of world. So that's amazing. So I do feel vindicated in a sense. But I think there might be the pressure after this in terms of delivering whatever I'm going to deliver next. So knowing myself, I think there will be some fear about the next book. But my previous book, Mr. Loverman, a lot of people loved it and felt very affectionate towards it. And in the early days of writing Girl, Woman, Other, I was thinking, oh, they love that book. They love Mr. Loverman. People aren't going to love this book. They're not going to love it. But now so many people are loving it.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, well, I shouldn't have worried about that because, every book will find its readership and find its audience. So what I feel is unstoppable. I think there's always fear, not fear that stops me though. So I do feel unstoppable. I feel that, but I felt that for a very long time, because I think a lot of people give up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have a publisher, Simon Prosser, Hamish Hamilton, who's always published me for 20 years. So that has been brilliant to have a home like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I've never taken it for granted that he will publish my books. That each book I'm going to send to him, he's going to say, yes, I'll publish it.
Mm.
But he has always published my books. So I've had that foundation, and he's always encouraged me. Well, he hasn't had to encourage me, but he's always accepted the quirky little things that I do, right? And so, but I haven't had I've had mainstream attention, but not major mainstream attention. People don't know my name around this country or the world, you know, and they come across my books and they will say, oh, especially if they've liked my work, oh, I really like your book, you know, and then they'll discover the other books and they'll say, but you know, I've never heard of you. And I think the Booker will change that.
Yeah.
So I'm unstoppable, but then I also have the Booker behind me to do the work of bringing my work to a larger audience. And that's just, you know, I'm really pleased about that.
Well,
that's an understatement, actually. It's like